So let's talk a little bit about the threat. And this, I'm going to be going through the first part of it really quick and get towards the middle part of it, because you are all the community of the convinced. You all know that there is a lot of pain out there with it. But this helps set the stage so you can see this whole, some of the remediation techniques that we're using out there with our customers. So one of the things I kind of point people out is when we're looking at botnets, it's not the botnet itself, right? People will look at the threat and they say, oh, wow, let's talk about the malware and let's talk to the 0-day and things like that. Look at it from a perspective that there's a human being driving it, and the human being is perpetrating some sort of crime. There's a criminal intent behind it. Now, we could talk about, state-driven sort of cyberwar activities and cyber espionage activities. They have a driver too. It's a human being with a particular driver. And you can look at the activists, the anarchists, the patriotic folks out there. They have a driver with it. It's all human beings driving things like, bullying, vandalism, extortion, theft, right? All this has a criminal element behind it. So when you go out there and you set up, here's my process and my procedure to help take care of my customers, there is some sort of crime you're trying to prevent. It's a crime prevention activity, right? So there's a drive with it. Well, and we know, because we see this here, you look at the virus totals list, our tools for protecting our customer are not up to where they could be. And we're still scratching our head with it. My last big vendor gig, the primary reason why I went there was trying to figure out why is the security development lifecycle methodology not working, right? It's just not working. And so I went to a vendor that simplified the problem, and we worked on that problem and came up with a different methodology, right? But the tools we use to actually lock down operating systems aren't panning out and working out. And when you have tools like the Packers that go out there and obfuscate malware all the time, to cut through anti-malware systems, and these are things I think you've seen before, it's very easy to get violated into the system. So you got these whole things where you got this criminal cloud, and I'll just walk through this really quick with it, where you got somebody out there wants to build a new botnet, right? So this is a botnet herder. And these are specialists now, because we got a lot of specialization going out there in the community. And so you got the bot herder gets up in the morning, has a cup of coffee, all right, and says, I'm going to start building a botnet. And he says, okay, let me go out there and stage my domain names on a name server. All right, and this is important because I'll point this out with passive, why we need to do passive DNS, and I'll ask all you guys to participate in passive DNS, because one of the first things they do is set up their names on their name server. This is like a precursor. And it's got all these weird domain names they will do this with. And some of them, we've seen them do IPv6 transaction with it. So we're seeing more and more v6 out there. So you got to think v4 and v6. Then it goes out there and says, okay, let's go set up my drive-by. I'm going to use spam to drive it out there, but I got to set up my drive-by. Then I'm going to go out there and usually outsource. Right? I don't need to do my own spam bot because it's cheaper for me to actually outsource to the crew who specializes with a criminal cloud that does spam. Because I can write it and everything. So I'll just pay them to go out there and do it. And what's he going to do? Okay, I got a target audience, right? You guys seen the spam runs here. We're at MAAWG. Okay, I'm going to do fantasy football. I'm targeting fantasy football guys, right? Come over here and click on me now on fantasy football so I can go out there and get you infected. And, if it's V6, cuts right through all that stuff, and then all the typical stuff that they do to load up the secondaries, and you get this, right, if it happens in V6, call the controllers, load up a new module. Yes, you can use V6 to cut through the firewalls and protections and things like that, and then re-victimize others. Okay, load up proxies. All right, so now I got a proxy. I'll watch the proxy. I'll watch the guy if he logs into a VPN and say, good, I got a backdoor. Sell that backdoor to people, right? This is, so I can get into a victim of crime of that, or do a bank login, right? We get a lot of this in Europe, where the criminals are going out there and riding your login to your bank, and while you think you're watching the spinning wheel thinking that the web server is slow, they're out there doing an ACH transfer and moving money out of your account, right? So we get all these sort of activities with it. So key thing I was getting towards is this part here. It's a criminal cloud. What is, people would talk about problems of over-the-top players who are, who providing operation, operators say, oh, what about the guys doing over-the-top stuff? These cyber criminals built their own over-the-top networks using our customer and our infrastructure to build these systems. They're stealing it, right? And if you want to disrupt it, then you have to figure out certain points to actually pick it apart, right? So yes, we can go after host systems, right? But your customer systems also need to be taken care of, right? So all these out there, it's not just one sort of, if I fix this, everything's going to go away, right? We have to have a more comprehensive approach to going about doing this, and then have enough people working together with it to actually put the pressure on the bad guys. As I pointed out before, we don't have ISC botnets out there because all the big backbone providers worked together and we started whacking down IRC-based botnets, right? We forced the cyber criminals to change the mode of operation. We can do that again out there using, certain techniques. So some of the scary consequences on this is, and this is kind of affects us how we do botnet remediation, why it's important to do botnet remediation. One, our secure operating systems are secure. Security development lifecycle, we still see things happen, right? Now, of course, we keep on making progress with it. As you move to the latest versions of operating systems, it's supposed to be more secure. But what we find out over time, when you have the amount of money flows, I'll point out in a little bit of how much money that people are seeing flowing across, right? And since this is MAAWG, and I can probably say stuff, when I see a particular botnet that got taken down 2 years ago, and this particular botnet was clearing per week 5 million a week. So this is a crew clearing 5 million stolen from primarily consumers a week, okay? That is a pretty large incentive to find 0 days, find vulnerabilities, right? When there's that amount of money out there flowing in the criminal economy. And when you got that, they're going to go after. I could build a secure operating system, and then I got economic incentive to go after it. The host security tools, antivirus, is not delivering to our expectations, right? The application security is not delivering. Getting more complicated. Network security tools, are not delivering to expectations. So we got a lot of defense to death. A lot of this stuff isn't delivering to our expectations. When I'm sitting in a past company and, I'm being a cert director and I get the shadow server report, which that's one of your homework assignments. Everybody here should be signing up to shadowserver.org and getting their free report. So I get the shadow server report and we get boom, there's a report, 19 computers infected with MedBrute, right? So I got MedBrute infection, right? I immediately make sure my InfoSec guy's out there and we pull those computers offline immediately. And as we pull those computers offline, which we did pretty quick, we got pretty good reaction there, right? Because security is part of the job of that vendor. And we go and do our postmortem. Operating system, totally patched, right? Antivirus, totally up to date, right? Spent a lot of money on antivirus system, okay? Went through all these security protection defenses of that company, right? 10 of the guys were using Firefox with no script because they were paranoid. They listened to one of my presentations earlier. It's a running paranoid. What they were hit with? They were hit with the Java 20 patch from several years ago. It was a zero-day exploit, and it was a malvertisement. Right? So you have basically all 19 users were doing the same thing. They were looking at the same website in the morning, having coffee, and the advertisement rolled over, boom, Java 20 exploit into the system. Okay? So even user education. Education is important for the users, but the days where we can say it's the user's fault, when you got all these problems out there, it's not just the user's fault. User education is critical and important, but we also have endemic industry issues we can't neglect. We got to keep on working on it with it. Now, notice in that particular case, the damage to the company was constrained because we had third-party notification. Here I used Shadow Server. Shadow Server came in there, and those systems are only violated for 12 hours. And then we pull them off the system and we damage control and recovery with it, right? So the system worked then, right? Painful, because doing a MedBroot recovery is like, delete the hard drive, sort of thing. So now what? Part of this is also understanding behavior. So what I'm going to give you right now is a talk I've given several times before, which is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective Cybercriminals. So you've heard of, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. This is 7 Habits of Highly Effective Cybercriminals. What it is it's interesting. When I got out of the military, what I really wanted to do was go into Defense Intelligence Agency. But this is 1989, and I was rushing out of the Air Force trying to get into DIA, but it was down because Cold War was over and they had a job freeze, and I couldn't get in. So I trained to be a defense analyst. That's why I wanted to be. Psychological behavior pattern, what you're going to see right now is what I wanted to do, right? But I took a temporary job building the internet, and I'm still doing the temporary job building the internet in the meantime with it. But now in the security world, I got to do this sort of stuff. So one of the big problems we run in here is we have, you go to conferences and stuff, and people start talking about malware, and look at this malware, and it's like, you go to a drug enforcement agent and says, oh yeah, let me tell you all about the Mexican cartel and stuff, and it's like, trying to solve methamphetamine drug problem by studying all the chemical makeup. It says, look at this chemical makeup, this is really cool. That's not the problem. That's not how you solve, meth problem. This is nice to know about the malware, but what we really need to know about is the person using it, right? An AK-47 doesn't hold up a bank. The person holding the AK-47 holds up a bank, right? So when we look at this stuff and we protect our customers, we have to remember we are fighting somebody, right? Somebody infected our customers. Somebody broke into our customers' homes. All right? So we are battling against somebody. That's why as we go through and do a botnet remediation, I clean up my customers, you got to know you're messing with somebody's criminal livelihood. All right? And they're going to be mad. They do retaliate. Okay? The biggest retaliation I've saw, and this is really crazy, was in China. All right? 2006. A triad gang that was up in Beijing got pissed off at a triad gang in Guangzhou, southern China. And for years, they were traditionally separated by physical separation, right? So, because North Crew and South Crew. But they both had a very lucrative online gambling business. Totally illegal, okay? And they were mad because their customers are being poached back and forth, right? So what does organized crime do when people are poaching each other's customers? They start shooting each other, except they shoot each other with DOS attack. Okay? So I get called in the middle of the night, working at this vendor, saying like, all 4 40-gig connections interconnecting the 2 major providers in China are totally saturated. China is about to go down, right, from a DOS attack from these 2 criminal crews shooting each other. Now, in China, they have this interesting law that says that you cannot do remote trigger black hole unless you file a police report. So the victim of the DOS attack has to file a police report. So China Telecom and others are sitting there going like, we can't do anything. What do we do? What do we do? Because the police said, all right, you can't do it until the victim of the crime calls us. Now, of course, the operator is saying, but the victim of the crime are criminals. Right? The victim of the crime is not going to call you and say this, right? So they're all stuck. So to remediate this, we had to, over a 12-hour period, deploy ICMP and UDP rate limiting on every single port on the biggest providers in the world. So some people who say you can't do BCP 38 and UDP and ICMP rate limiting on the major vendor equipment, well, we did it in 12 hours. That's how that DOS attack. And that DOS attack was a retaliation, right? It's human beings retaliating against each other, right? So it's the people up there, not the tool, right? So That's what we want to focus on. This is kind of, I got to change the color of this world map because our world map, you know, people see the geographic. We don't have geographic. It's all, you know, the point of this slide is everything is all, there's no national borders, right? We do have regional effects. China is a regional effect. A lot of cybercrime activities in China, you only see inside China. You don't see outside China. Like that DOS attack I just described, you know, I call buddies out there and say, hey, do you see this attack? And outside China, you didn't see it. You had to be inside China to see it. So we do have regionalizations that happen with it. When I walk through this now from a human standpoint, I classify this into 3 main buckets. The criminal threat, which is the big one, which we talk about right now, that's the volume-wise what the most is out there because all the money is there. That's where all the new tools are being developed with it. The second one, which is the cyber war, cyber espionage, things like that, is out there. Now it's straight up public, right? We see it out there. I don't worry so much about that. You know, some people say we should worry about it. I don't worry about it. Why? Because coming from that environment, I always know that the private has a general in charge, right? It's part of state policy. There's other factors involved with that, right? So I'm not worried about that taking out the internet or things like that because it is, you know, if somebody wanted to do that, then it's part of a state issue. It's part of something beyond my pay grade of going on with it. So I watch it, I look at it. It has some interesting implications if your customers get infected with it, right? But it's not something I worry about. The things that keep me up at night are this last area over here, what I call the patriotic, passionate, principle, anarchist, anonymous, whatever you want to call them, of individuals that aren't constrained. See, cybercrime is interesting because as I'll talk about it here, it's constrained. When I talk about the principles, there's a nice understanding of it. Cyber warfare is constrained, right? There's somebody in charge of some private who says, pull the button and, you know, DOS a country. This third area, there's no constraints. Some kid just gets mad and starts, let me take out the internet, right? And there's no constraints there, right? So that's the one I worry about. I lose sleep over. I don't lose sleep over cybercrime because I know we will eventually be knocking this stuff down because it's just a matter of time with it. So the cyber criminal ones, though, and this is also a reason why, because I walk through these key principles. We watch these things. And I got to give you credit. This whole, looking at it, this approach, all started with a conversation with Rob Thomas and I. Rob Thomas from over at, I can't say the company, that's just Rob Thomas. People know Rob Thomas. So Rob and I were all talking about this, and we started developing this whole mystery economy sort of technique with it. And so this is where it all came from. So here are the core principles out here, right? Don't get caught. Don't work too hard. Follow the money. If you can't take out the target, move the attack to coupled dependency. Cross-jurisdictional attacks. Attack people, don't prosecute, and stay below the pain threshold. So principle 1, a cyber criminal will never do anything that there's a chance of them getting caught. So anything you could deploy in a network that increases the chance of them getting caught will push them away. Right? So this is one of those things, it's a behavior. You're not fighting the malware, you're fighting the human behavior. If you make it easier to catch them because it's visible, you log in, you're seeing things, they'll do something else because there is something else for them to do. There's a lot of different vulnerabilities and ways to go out there and do stuff. So they'll do something. So if you can find ways to catch them, to make it more visible for them, you know, they'll do something else, right? Because they don't want to get behind bars. And if you look in the press and you follow what's going on with law enforcement, we're becoming more and more effective in putting handcuffs on people, okay? We don't need new laws. I mean, you know, a lot of the laws that exist right now internationally allow us to do what we need to do. We just need more practice because doing international coordination of cybercrime is hard. But the industry and governments around the world, law enforcement, we are doing stuff, right? And you're seeing it in the press with it. There's you know, several operations in progress as we speak. Some of them I'm involved with. Most of them I'm not. And the ones that I'm not, I'm aware of, I'll just sit back and wait and read it in the newspaper and go, yes, yay team, go for it, right? We'll put more handcuffs on people. So we are catching people. So anything you can do that makes it where you can catch them, impacts their behavior. The next thing is anything you can do to make them work harder, right? So you get a new vulnerability come out, vulnerability report, whatever operating system, whatever application, things like that. You look at it. One of the things I look at is how easy it is to weaponize. How easy it is to put it in malware or do a remote exploit or something like that. If it's really hard, if a vulnerability is really hard, they have to jump through all these hoops to actually make it happen, I go the likelihood of that vulnerability being active exploit used out in the wild is much lower because they have to work hard. Because a lot of these guys are good, these cyber criminals are good, but they don't like working hard. They coming in there, the 4-hour work week book, it's like that. That's what they want to do. Work 4 hours and I'm done. And then go drink vodka and do whatever, right? They don't want to work hard with it. So anything you can do in your system to have them work harder discourages them. Doesn't make them go away, but it discourages them. The other thing is follow the money. A cyber criminal won't do anything unless they make money. So if you can't see the monetary path, they most likely won't do it, but it also doesn't mean they haven't figured out the monetary path. Like, for instance, I think one of the things we'll see a lot of over the next 6 months is a new monetary path that is really, really obvious. Really, really obvious, right? We're finding it very easy to break into web hosting facilities with, WordPress and Drupal and things like that. So we're seeing very easy to break into those. So what you do is you go into one of these places to actually, here's an online, and I use a external charging system, and I break into it, and then I change the charging around. So instead of having the money go to the company, you have the money come to me as a criminal, and then I put it through a laundering system, right? When you look at that, there's been 4 or 5 of them last week. I was looking at and tracking it. I was looking at it this morning. And I look at that and go that's really obvious. That's a really easy criminal sort of activity to do. And the criminals will do that because they can make money off of it. Now, people who did that probably said, I wouldn't have thought of people doing that before. I thought it was pretty secure, right? So even though there's no criminal exploit, these guys are out there trying to figure out creative ways to make money, stealing money, right? So you may say, I'm not under threat because there's no way that if somebody DOSes my network, they can make money off of it yet, right? It's a matter of time. They can think very creative with it, but if they can't make money off it, then they don't do it. They'll also shift targets around. You see this especially with DDoS extortion. I got a very strong anti-DDoS solution on my network. I can protect myself. I go, okay, what about your upstream provider? I'll attack him instead, right? So this is why they'll shift targets around, right? I'll attack your, look at how the system is built. So as we get more complicated, cloud-based systems, and you have interdependencies throughout the internet, they say, well, if I can't attack you here, I'll attack you there. They'll look for those couple dependencies to take out. Everything to do is cross-jurisdictional. So you got to think internationally. There's no I'm isolated in my country now. Everything's cross-jurisdictional, and they do that for a reason because it's harder, makes the law enforcement exercise harder. So everything to do is cross-jurisdictional, and they also do a lot of attacking people who don't want to prosecute. We see edges of society to go after people who don't want to prosecute. So still have a bunch of that. This last one here is an interesting one. We started with 6 habits. The 7th habit started around 2006, where we saw that the 2005 DOS attack wave started going down to below a threshold. And the threshold was basically the SLA factors of many of the big providers in the US. So what happened was, when do you respond to a DOS attack and when do you not respond to a DOS attack? Several big providers realized that what they can do is just use regular old SLA, IPPM, inter-provider metrics and say, here's my threshold for quality of service across my network, and if a DOS attack hits this level, then I do something. If it's below that level, then it's not worth me doing anything to it. And the criminals found that equilibrium. They found out basically when does the backbone providers react. They found the threshold. it was the same behavior we saw in the banking industry, right? How much money when I break into your bank account do I steal? Okay, 10 years ago it would be like in maybe $100. Today it will be $1,000. Why is it different? Because the acceptable loss threshold of a bank changed over time, right? That's a threshold. So they find these thresholds, they know where these thresholds are, and then they stay underneath that threshold as they go out there and say, you're all at one particular bank. Here's the acceptable loss threshold for the bank or for the credit card agency. Here's when they trigger an investigation. They don't trigger an investigation. Here's when they report, and they don't report, and I stay below that. They're doing that also with the backbone providers. So they'll also do this with you when you deploy your botnet remediation tools with your customers, right? Because for instance, I mentioned Singapore. Singapore has this, 200 bots identified for Singapore. Service providers must react. They have a threshold. And so they'll know that, right? That will be a figure that will get out, and the criminals will know that. So as you put these different thresholds of when you react, assume that the criminals will figure it out. They'll figure out that threshold, right? And then they'll respond to it, and they'll stay underneath the wire for it. So that's why some of these things we're never going to have disappear totally. So it's a matter of mitigating risk with it. These criminals trust each other up to an extent that they don't steal money from each other, right? And they steal money from each other. They go after each other. And there are dire consequences. We've had people directly related to cybercriminal deaths, in different parts of the world with it. And I'm surprised, this is kind of one of my shocking things, and because this is restricted with MAAWG, I'm surprised we haven't had more. I mean, when you got a criminal activity for one particular botnet crew that's clearing $5 million a week, that's higher than drug gangs in certain cities. That you mess with that money, you get popped. So I'm surprised that in this highly lucrative cyber criminal activity, we haven't seen more of this out there. It's kind of an interesting sort of factor with it. A lot of cyber criminal activities. I'll just flip through these slides. You can get these slides and look through it. This is slides that talk about the section with it. The cycles repeat and the increases over time. You opportunity where you can actually make a difference, and that's what we're trying to do. How many people here looked at last year's Norton Semantic survey, which you can criticize, but I like it because they actually put a pretty reasonable methodology out there. And I think one of the key things, which I'll talk about next, why I think we can make a big difference with this, is that it sets the bar for other surveys. Now people have to have more rigorous, let's count the loss to society. We were getting ready to count more of the loss to society right in the beginning part of 2008, then the economic crisis happened, and all the different banking institutions and insurance companies were distracted reasonably because we had economic collapse or going through. Last year, I think we started getting more interest where we're starting to look at what is the global economic impact of cybercrime, and people starting to count it. We will get more of that out there. I mean, so here, their figure that Semantic came up with this particular survey was, $388 billion, which is bigger than, drug trafficking and human slave prostitution activity combined together. That's a pretty significant figure. As I mentioned before, community action makes a difference, right? The Makolo example, which I talked about in this part here, we knocked down Makolo, which is a whole operator. The Rove Digital, right? That's a whole operator we knocked down. Those are temporal knockdowns, though. You knock it down, there's enough cyber criminals out there, they either step into the vacuum. It's just like taking out a drug crew. You talk to drug enforcement agency, and I think we have a lot of lessons to learn from them where they say, okay, how do we actually stop a drug epidemic? If we just take out one drug gang, you have a marginal impact, because once you take that one drug gang, you pull them out, there's a vacuum there, the other drug gangs move into the territory then, right? So looking at, I think one of the things going forward as we are working together, we're putting more tools out there, is looking at things like, okay, how does FBI and Drug Enforcement Agency take down and really make a difference in knocking down drugs, or name the crime. There's a lot I think we can learn from a law enforcement world out there. Okay, In cyber warfare, there are generals involved. That's why I don't worry about it. And the one thing out there that I'll talk about with my ex-DOD colleagues is cyber warfare, where does it happen? It happens on your network, right? There isn't it's over on this battlefield over here that's not me. It happens on the telecommunications infrastructure we have throughout the world. So I always told people in different governments around the world, it says, you launch a DOS attack against another country, it could be seen as an SLA violation and they shut down your DOS attack. What are you going to do? Right? That's one of the interesting factors of mitigates the cyber war. If somebody says, oh, yeah, I'm going to do a cyber war, I'm going to affect all of your customers here, so all your customers, I'm going to affect all your customers so I can attack another country, you're probably going to be upset. I said, no, you're not going to affect my customers. That's not what you're going to do. But it's funny because I've heard, in some of the other countries, people say, oh, yeah, that's what we'll do. The battle space is different. And then these anonymous crews, it's different with it. I mean, they change the whole impact when you got people out there who can do things and there's nothing controlling them.